Get $3 off every order at PlayAsia by using the code CENSORED.
Recently, Nintendo made some big statements on their localization practices, in particular for Xenoblade Chronicles X and the upcoming Xenoblade Chronicles 2. In these statements, Nintendo of America's company president highlighted how there are a simple collection of words that they use to define how they tackle localization, these being cultural relevance and understandings of the ratings and ratings implications. Now, the rest of the article explains how Nintendo likes to try and keep in mind what can be seen as offensive outside of Japan, and explains that this is the reason that games like Xenoblade Chronicles X had various changes made to them. They also comment that the original Japanese creators work with the localization teams during this process and have their full consent. For example, Monolith Studios CEO tells a story about Xenoblade Chronicle X's breast slider, a character creation feature that you may recall was removed outside of Japan. To quote, "There was a discussion about the breast slider. Jokingly I said, well, would it help if we had a crotch slider for the male? Obviously it was a joke, but Nintendo responded, obviously it's not going to work out. I do realise there's a cultural difference between what Japanese people think and what the rest of the world thinks." You may have noticed that both company presidents mentioned the different countries' cultures, with Reggie also using a term called cultural relevance. Now, Censored Gaming has spoken about something similar in the past, and felt that now would be a good time to take a full in-depth look at a popular term that's used today in the video game industry, this term being culturalization. For this video, my main source will be taken directly from the International Game Developers Association, which is a non-profit professional association for over 12,000 video game developers worldwide. I'd like to draw your attention towards a guide that the organization has made publicly available from 2012, titled Best Practices for Game Localization. The intro reads, "This is the second draft of a best practices or how-to guide for the translation and culturalization of video game content. It is a compilation of suggestions by people who have had years of experience in the field, all members of the IGDA Game Localization SIG. The aim is to help newcomers learn the trade, as well as to offer insights into tricks and tips that even more experienced localization staff can adapt and apply to their future projects." So right off the bat, notice the use of the term culturalization. Scrolling down to the contents, you'll notice that localization is only one of these categories, and that the guide begins and devotes a whole section to culturalization. The localization section goes into the typical localization work that you'll be most familiar with. It describes aspects such as translation, voice recording, and the quality assurance process, and outlines various best practices, like making sure there is at least one editor for every 3 translators when tackling Asian languages, and for every 4 translators with European languages. It appears to be a pretty helpful guide, and it offers an interesting look at what goes on behind the scenes when localizing our favourite games. However, back to culturalization, the website Gaming Industry IQ has a really precise, straight to the point definition for this industry term. To quote, "More recently the term culturalization has risen in popularity. More than simply translating the game, this is the science of inspecting dialogue, imagery, even actions for things that may cause offence to particular markets or cultures." Recalling Nintendo's earlier comments, this sounds very much like the process that was described there, and how their approach to localization also aims to adapt any possibly offensive themes for other cultures. Bringing things to the guide again, now whilst we could go through all of the pages here, somebody recently tweeted me this summary highlighting some specific points of interest. Culturalization ensures that gamers will not be disengaged by a piece of content that is considered incongruent or even offensive in the game's environment. Culturalization mistakes often prove to be costly for game developers and publishers. Not just the loss of potential revenue, but the greater effects of negative public relations, damage to corporate image, and strained relationships with the local government. In the worst case, a local government may not only ban the game, but take more direct action against the company, including detainment of local personnel for questioning and even incarceration. The guide goes on talking about different types of problematic content, and you may have already read a little faster and onto these yourself. Let's fast forward through the guide though and onto some specific examples taken from popular games. Page 26 contains Appendix 2, Culturalization Examples, and one of the biggest games mentioned is perhaps Capcom's Resident Evil 5 from 2009. The guide reads, "Even before its release, this title generated significant negative publicity due to its perceived racism. In the game, the clean-cut white Caucasian protagonist is seen roaming through a village in sub-Sahara Africa and gunning down unarmed, obviously impoverished African villagers. While the publisher Capcom was quick to show that the African villagers were infected with zombies, the stock imagery of a white man killing black villagers invoked powerful negative imagery. Notions of the Great White Hunter, the Dark Continent of Africa, and so forth quickly came to mind for many people. While the developers had a clear rationale for the conflict within the game's context, the backlash provided ample reason for a publisher to pause and question if mimicking that kind of negative imagery is appropriate. I'd like to just highlight again that this is a guide direct from the International Game Developers Association on best practices for game localization. This is just one of many possible examples of what could be seen as offensive content, and with the evidence presented here, along with statements such as Nintendo's on their localization of Xenoblade Chronicles, it seems that some localizers are incorporating aspects of culturalization into their localization work. I invite you all to research this yourself. All sources will be contained in the description, and this is a very real industry term that you can easily Google yourself. But let's not finish there. Let's take one more look at the guide and a few conclusions that it makes. Under the culturalization section is a summary stating, create the game you want to create, but don't forget the global multicultural audience who will be participating in your vision, and hopefully enjoying it without any cultural disruption. Well executed culturalization within a development cycle isn't turnkey. It takes time to implement successfully. However, the benefits to a company's content quality, government relations, and public image amongst local gamers will prove to be a valuable long-term investment. Additionally, at the very end of the guide is this final conclusion. This is a living document that will continue to be updated as needed. While this isn't intended to be the definitive guide to game localization, it is meant to be the groundwork that will inspire people to adapt the concepts to their project needs and boost the overall quality of game localization worldwide. Whilst culturalization isn't a new term to censor gaming, in response to recent events, I feel now would be an appropriate time to really start using this industry standard term where appropriate. For example, instead of mentioning localization, in some cases it could be better to talk about culturalization, and this is something you may start to notice in future videos. As always, Censor Gaming is committed to creating the definitive resource for censorship, as well as coverage of things seen as related to the censorship discussion as a whole. Culturalization, the removal of things perceived to be offensive during localization, is seen as very much a part of Censor Gaming's mission statement, and so any changes made to past, present and future games due to this reason is something you'll be sure to be able to find reported right here on Censor Gaming. Until next time, thank you for watching.